So we just got another tuning pass, and for some inexplicable reason, there's no warrior nerf.
So Blizzard came out with some further tuning now. It felt like it was a few weeks ago when they did it last time.
Yeah, but doesn't it feel like they've done more tuning passes now than they usually do?
Yeah, probably. I mean, they did like pretty much every week at the start, right? And now it's been a few weeks, I think, but yeah, we got some more coming at least, which is, I mean, it's good.
I feel like it's been very frequent since the PTR of the War Within. There's just been so many tuning passes, and for the first time I haven't kept track. Like I haven't been able to keep track of what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this time around it's pretty small. It's like, it's like a 5% nerf to enhancement, 5% nerf to Prot Paladin, whatever, or something, which are like already overperforming,
Yeah.
Which makes sense. Some small buffs to things that aren't played. So yeah, I think it makes sense in general. I guess the only thing that surprises me is like what surprises me is like how Blizzard is thinking about like when is something egregiously overpowered and needs to be nerfed and when is something not, because obviously they should nerf enhancement. That is definitely a correct nerf, because like they're like, if you play them well, and I think that's maybe one of the reasons why, is because I think it's pretty hard to play enhancement and you need like everything to really line up to actually do good damage. But if you're a good enhancement player, you will gap people in keys like by 20% or something, like, and same in raid. I think like they're just so good,
From my understanding in raid, I mean, obviously there's skill to it like most specs, but supposedly there's just a bunch of RNG depending on which wolf you get. Or something like that, where you can swing like millions of DPS in the opener just on pure RNG.
Yeah, I've heard that
And I
there's
feel like
definitely
that's a big problem.
yeah, that's pretty. That's they should. I mean, there has to be some form of RNG, right? Otherwise, it's pretty boring, or like everything will be kind of stale. Yeah, like having that big of a diff, by just RNG. Like I don't know, but let's say like you kill Sick Run or whatever, like some pretty short like single target fight, right? It's like 4-minute fight or something. I don't know. I guess. And I mean, let's say you played exactly the same. Or well, I guess let's just say that you played 100% according to the sim, right? If that can gap you from like 100 log to like a 85 log or something, just by RNG, not by like fight RNG, but just like your proc RNG or something, that is insane. I don't know how much it is. Could have probably looked at like the spread of a sim, like see how the highs and lows. But yeah, I've also heard that they have like a really really high RNG component.
But I also feel like they need to make. There's a big difference in what type of RNG you sometimes have, right? Because when you have RNG that affects your rotation, I think that's design-wise a good thing, right? Like if you get procs and you feel like, oh, this was a good pull, like you can actually feel that you had good RNG. But I feel like most of the time, especially when something is broken like this, I don't think it affects your playstyle very much. I think it's just you get the correct buff or you get the correct crits or whatever, and you just do more damage. It's sort of like a corruption, like we talked about last week, or you just, for a reason you do not feel, do more damage. And I don't think that's the place for RNG. I feel like you should always feel the RNG.
Yeah, now I wish I looked up what that was called. But the star corruption thing that procced, that you just felt it on the meter, but you didn't feel it in any other way. But I don't know if it's true that enhancement is like that. I just heard that like maybe people are, I don't know, maybe it's not correct, but people are saying that it's actually hard to play enhancement correctly. Like at least in M+, I don't know about raid.
I think it is. I think it has like a very, very, very fast-paced prio list, basically. I think it's been like that for a long time. I'm no expert, so I might be wrong, but from my understanding, the complexity of it is mainly that you don't really know what your next GCD is going to be like, right? So you need to play proper in every instance of the fight. I don't know if you remember, but even back in like Legion, they started with this rotation helper specifically for enhancements. And there were some, I think there was some rumor, or I remember that one of the helpers at one point was like actually the top DPS you could do. Like you should play with it, but most people that are really good at the game don't really want to play with that stuff, right?
You mean like Hekili or whatever it's called, the thing that just like...
Yeah, something like that. Because I think it displays what your next GCD is probably gonna be, but it also displays what it could be or something. So it sort of preps you for the 3 buttons you could press or something.
Right.
Because I feel quite confident that that's the main complexity. It's just that you don't really, based on procs and a lot of circumstances, you just don't really know. And I've been playing Disc for a long time, right? And that's the complete opposite to that, right? Like Disc is also seen as a difficult healer to play, but that has nothing to do with it being difficult rotational in that sense. Like you literally know every GCD of the fight if you're gonna plan it out. Like there's no variance whatsoever.
Yeah.
And that's what I liked about playing something like, I played a lot of enhancement in way back, but I also liked it in LA, where like you could always feel like you got a lot of lava burst procs, and you got more maelstrom, and the good RNG was really noticed. And then you played something like Boomy that had 0 procs at the time, but still very RNG based on like the outcome of your incarn or something, right? And people usually look at elemental or enhancement as a pure RNG spec, and they look at something like Boomy that doesn't have procs as less RNG. But in my head, it could be the complete opposite, right? Because when you don't have any procs, the RNG just lands on the meter somehow, if that makes sense.
Right.
And that's very unsatisfying to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree. Like, I think it's more fun if the RNG, you know, does something for your rotation rather than just like being a source of variance to your damage or
Yeah,
your
but it could
throughput.
be something like the big star, what's it called? Full moon crit or something, had a way bigger impact than if you got 3 or 8 resets on your maelstrom or something. But the maelstrom you really feel the entire fight through, you know?
Yeah, but actually, the full moon thing,
Mhm.
even though I guess technically it didn't, you know, do anything for your rotation, I think just because of how visually apparent it was, people still like, oh my god, yes, fuck yeah, full moon, you know.
I don't think so.
You don't think
Because
so? You know,
imagine
okay.
imagine you're doing your opener. You're doing like the first 30 seconds or something of your fight. And let's just take our ignorant take on Boomies here as an example. Let's say that every GCD is planned out. You play 30 seconds, you pop everything, and you know if you're gonna parse orange, you need that one full moon to crit. If it doesn't crit, you're not gonna get a top parse. Like there's no shot, because that's 20% or 25% of your opener damage or something incredibly high for the time spent, right? Would you find that satisfying? I think you'd be super pissed. You just open, not crit, and then whine in Discord and hope you wipe.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, sure. Like, I don't think you would find that satisfying. But I mean, like, I think there's a big difference between something like, or at least when that was a proc, like when that was something you sort of clicked in, like Legion, that's a different thing. But when it's been like you randomly proc that thing, and it
That
does a
probably
lot of,
fits better.
yeah, but yeah, and again, it's still like kind of ass because like there's nothing you can do about it. But it's still a little bit like you at least see something happening in the game, you know. Whereas, you know, some random thing that you don't see and it just randomly, like, let's say you just crit all the time or whatever, right? You don't see that, but like a big fucking moon shooting out of the sky, you see that, right?
Yeah, for
So that
sure.
at least some sort of visual feedback outside of details, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, definitely doesn't feel good when like a very big portion of your performance is based on something that's out of your control, if that makes sense. I wanted to,
Yeah.
or yeah, did you want to say anything more on this topic?
Nah, nothing new. You go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to take like a slight weird trip now because of this. Like when because one thing that you mentioned was this rotation helper.
Mhm.
And so first I like a bunch of different things that I thought about now when you said this. Like I saw I was gonna say my life, but like my WoW career flashing before my eyes. And like if you think back to like long time ago, like at this point, I guess it's like 20 years ago or whatever. But like everyone, like it wasn't like you have like a priority list. You literally had a rotation. It was like you press the buttons in this order, and that's why
Mhm.
to this day it's still called the rotation, even though no one actually has like a rotation like that you just go around and do, right?
Mhm.
Um, and that was because in like Classic and Burning Crusade or whatever, right? There were pretty much no procs. No one had any procs, and there was no haste or any of these things. So you could statically define your entire rotation by saying like, well, you do this sequence of, depending on how many abilities or whatever your class had, but maybe your sequencing is you're just doing these 5 buttons in this order all the time. That's your whole thing. There's nothing more to it. And I guess that's why they sort of over the time introduced this sort of RNG, which I think makes a lot of sense. But then when when you said this thing with the rotation helper showing like different options.
I think that's what it does. I'm not. You can't quote me, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't know either. I don't use that. But I remember another add-on that I think used to be really popular, and no one really plays with it now, I think, except this YouTuber like Hiruma Drex or Hiruma Dex or something. He makes like top 10 WoW videos or something. Do you know who that is?
No. No.
Okay, I think it's like pretty big WoW YouTuber, but he's like super casual player, I think.
Okay.
But he uses this add-on, I think, still. But it's the one, if you remember, where it's like a timeline add-on. So essentially, like you have you have all of your cooldowns or all of your like abilities on a
Oh
timeline. You know which one
yeah.
it is? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you set it up in like a priority so that like, oh well, obviously like if this thing reaches the top, then it will be in like frontmost because that's the most high priority to press, right?
Mhm.
So like that was like I guess the rotation helper of the day, like 15 years ago or whenever that came out. I don't know.
I think I remember that in Votelk or
Yeah, also maybe it's more.
maybe
Maybe it's like
Kata.
17 years ago or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, because yeah, I remember like seeing that and I was like, oh yeah, this is so smart. And it is. I mean, it's nice. But fast forward to now, I don't think anyone really plays with that, and I think that has to do with a few things, which is like, first of all, I guess that wouldn't really help because like your rotation has a lot more procs and other things now, right? That would make that just weird. But yeah, also for the rotation helpers, obviously they sort of lock you into this thing because otherwise they have to do a lot of weird processing, right? If they're going to be like super dynamic and be like, oh yeah, now I can see that you are in range of like 3 targets, so now I'm going to switch to the AoE rotation. I don't know if it works like that, but maybe it does. But that's a lot of different things to put into that add-on.
Yeah.
But I guess the point I wanted to make with my whole rant was I wanted to arrive at where we are today. And I wanted to ask you if you have any like, do you do any of those type of things for your UI to help yourself make those type of decisions, or do you just display all the information to yourself and you still manually make every decision, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think I've gone the whole way around where, like, at first I didn't play with any add-ons basically, like way back, right? And then I just got more and more add-ons, especially when I started PvEing more than PvPing. And then at one point I set up my own weak aura packs because I wasn't happy with the ones you could get of Vago or whatever at the time. And now I've just scaled back, scaled back, scaled back, and now I play with basically no. I think I play with literally no weak auras, I guess it effectively would be, right? That does some sort of logic for me. I think what I would use if I played a spec that suited it maybe would be some basic color coding on specific abilities. Maybe color coding on the resource is something I do, like 3 combo points. I just make it yellow because I usually play with text and not like the bars because they're annoying. So yeah, quite a long answer to say I don't do that now. I think I did more in the past. And I was actually thinking about this a bit recently, about why I moved more to like a Bliss standard UI and removed a lot of the logic. And I think a part of it is because I'm playing healer where it's not as scripted, right? And I feel like I need to make my own decisions nonetheless. It doesn't matter if I am slightly less optimal about what buffs I have or the exact cooldown timings of stuff. But I know that when I played the disc, I really wanted a week that I talked to you with that would display. So if my evangelism wasn't ready before I got both of my radiances back with some leeway, I wanted it to be displayed on the screen so I wouldn't start ramping without being able to finish the complete ramp.
Right.
Stuff like that I think is great, but yeah, generally no. How about you?
Yeah, so I try to offload complex decisions from myself, I guess. So yeah, I mean, I think that as you mentioned, like I use like color coding a lot for those type of things. Like the I guess the most common like mainstay of what I always do is I have like my rage bar as a Fury Warrior. Is always gonna be dark blue if I should rampage, and if I shouldn't rampage, it's gonna be red, which is like the default color of my rage bar. And that's just because then I don't have to think about all the 20 different rules for when you may or may not want to rampage. Of course, you can just play Fury Warrior and be like, if I can rampage, I will rampage. I think that's like how Blizzard like like that's how like Fury Warrior is designed. It's like you just want to rampage when you can or whatever. But there are some optimizations to be made regards to that, right? And then there's the same thing with my builders. It's like during or because of different procs or stacks or whatever, you may want to use them in a different priority order or whatever. And all of these things, they don't matter that much, but they're an optimization. And if you want to, have a rank 1 logs, or if you want to, push high keys or whatever, it's good to get these type of different small edges if you can. But a lot of those things, I think the mental load of trying to think about these things. So I guess like one super random example is like, I think right now, like if you're playing a Slayer Fury Warrior and you should execute, it's like, well, either you should have like 3 stacks on the target of your Slayer Strike or whatever it's called, which is some like debuff, or you should not have either of your Bloodthirst or Raging Blow be empowered by whatever that talent is called, but whatever after you rampage. And yada yada yada. So there's like a whole list of conditions, and of course it's possible to just show all the relevant buffs, show all the relevant things, and make a decision in the moment. But for me, when I just get like that little blue glow on my, execute icon, then I know to press it, and it just saves me that thinking. But what ends up happening then is like, oh, of course, like after a while, because I'll set this like at the start of the patch when, okay, yeah, this is the best rotation or whatever, the best priority list to run. And then most of the time you just get used to that. So it's like, oh, well, it becomes almost like a rotation or a sequencing. So usually what ends up happening is like, yeah, well, you rampage into Raging Blow into Bloodthirst or their empowered versions. And then if you can execute, you will execute most of the time. So it's like, it becomes this like sort of cycle. But then, not like sometimes in this like little cycle that you do, you actually don't want to execute because you may not have any Slayer strikes or whatever, or you don't have a sudden death proc or whatever. And all these different things, I don't want to manually keep track of it. It's just so convenient for me to just have this little thing show it for me. So I think for those type of decisions, for all the specs that I play, I always try to lean on that side instead of trying to show just a bunch of buffs and try to make a decision, because I feel like it's just more likely to make the wrong decision, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just laughing at all the specs I'm playing.
Hey, Warrior has 3 different specs, okay?
Yeah. No, but I think I want to stay on this a bit because I think this is interesting. I hadn't thought about it in this way, but essentially you're doing 2 things, right? on your color coding of your basic builders and spenders, you're trying to offload like very common min-maxy things, right? Like the first priority list to get on Wowhead or wherever you look at you can look at your stuff. You're just trying to not think about the tiny 5% that matters all the time, you know?
Yeah.
And on the other hand, with the execute, you're instead trying to find the specific moment when execute is the best button to press. I guess you could put it under the first category as well, but effectively you're just narrowing down a situation where, okay, this is when I press execute.
Yes.
And I feel like that's sort of the path I've been down more, or I've been wanting to go down on, but haven't been bothered to set everything up. And I think a bit of it has come from me starting to play healer and not DPS, and you just keep evolving on DPS, right?
Yeah.
Because for me, I feel like I can't really offload any rotational help. The healers in general, healing base rotation isn't really that varied with procs, and these circumstances that you can offload doesn't really exist. Like I can't think of one where like, if I have this proc and that proc, I should echo instead of, you know. And I've been really, really honing down and focusing on like the edge cases, or trying to find the best time to press execute, sort of, is more aligned with healing, I think. So when I ask you this, if we step away a bit from the weak auras or the rotational help specifically, in what ways do you separate different kinds of information on your screen? So let's say you're gonna pull Ansrac. You're using your eyes and color coordination for your rotation. You have some other weak auras that can pop up in very niche situations where you want to press a button you don't usually press. What do you use for audio and anything else I'm not thinking of? This is a very poorly formulated question, but do you understand what I mean?
So are you asking me about like things that relate to how I play my character, or how it relates to the raid boss, if that makes sense?
What other in what other ways are you trying to take away thinking from yourself? Reallocate? No.
Offload, I
You said
guess,
it
is the
well.
word.
Yeah. Offloading brain. Maybe you can
Okay.
formulate my question for me.
Yeah, okay. So I guess what you're asking is like outside of my own core rotation, so things like raid fight or whatever have you, how am I offloading brain capacity to just a machine or a weak or whatever?
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think definitely I mean, I should say first, I guess that like I don't play with any of those like raid packs anymore. Like you know, the packs that just show you everything that's happening, you know, in the raid or
Yeah.
whatever. I don't play with any of those. I don't like that. I think that they're just like, it's too much, and it's just usually whenever you play with those, it just ends up you show the same debuff in like 4 places in your UI, it feels like. And I already have a very, very centralized place where I show my debuffs in a very clear way, like, you know, unfiltered, just debuffs, you know. Or well, I filter out some small debuffs like that you don't care about, like Satyr or whatever. But in general, like, so I don't like to have those type of things, as a baseline. But yeah, so a few things about the offloading. So
Mhm.
I offload with, I use like the voice version of DBM. So like everything to me is like being read back. So it will say like, you know, I don't know, spread, run away, whatever. There's a very large number of different things. And that doesn't necessarily have to be on my screen much. And generally, after a while, when you pull a fight, you kind of just get used to it, or at least the way it works out for me is I get very used to like the pacing of the fight. So I don't like, I'll not really need to think
It's a
about those things.
cue, you know.
Yeah, it's just a cue, but it's also like, those things I think help more the earlier you are, and then you'll just know about it from, you know, playing the fight. But then I'll say this: I'm very quick to add like small personal helper weakoras for random shit. So I have very simple example of this on Ansrac. When what's called the Silken Tombs come out, When you play warrior, what you do is you just spell reflect every time, and that's such a, you know, obviously it's very easy. You shouldn't fail, but probably like when we did it, I probably sat in a Silken Tomb twice or something on progress because I accidentally forgot to click it, or I, you know, something happened. I was targeted by something else, or whatever happened, but I didn't click it, and I sit there in a Silken Tomb like a moron, you know. So then I'm like, okay, why should I have to care about this? Why should I have to think about, oh yeah, the boss is casting now, it's time to, you know, like, I don't want to think about this. So what I did is make a super, super simple weak aura that just pops up huge in the middle of my screen in big pink text saying reflect, and also a voice cue saying reflect. And then it remains there on the screen until I actually get the spell reflect buff on me. And that is triggered by my target, because I always target the boss in this phase, is when the boss is casting this thing, right? So then I always know it, and the only way I get rid of it is if I actually use the reflect. And I had something very similar for that had maybe a little bit more logic, but I had a very similar one for like Sarkareth, for example, where you were reflecting in phase one and stuff. So it's just like, I don't want to have to think about what's happening on the fight or whatever. I just want to be told exactly when to do this, and I'll just use my scroll wheel down, which is my spell reflect, and that's it, you know. So
Yeah, okay.
I'll add those small type of things to try to like offload from myself. I don't know. Do you have anything? Do you do anything like this or anything similar?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the offloading comes with the ERT note weak auras and such, right? Since you usually plan all your healing cooldowns in a sheet and you import it, you get a reminder. So I'm basically looking at a place for when's my next CD coming up, right? Like when am I next assigned to do something bigger? And these have gotten a bit better, or you've been able to do more offloading with these technically over the years, but I've stayed on the first iteration where you just get an icon and like a ping. And that's it. Nowadays, you can sort of like choose in actions that it can voice line the ability or something 6 seconds before or whatever. But I found out it being cluttered. So basically, I'm using my audio cues for just the fight, either with the Big Wix pings or countdowns in different languages. I think we talked about this a bit with the boss prep.
Yeah.
But I use the ERT note weak aura to help me understand what I'm about to do in the future. And I think I allocate all my own brain powers on like the current rotation and raid frames and perhaps mechanics. So I think there's a clear difference in where you and I usually try and what you and I are trying to do. You are sort of trying to, or I guess not, you're trying to remove a brain power from yourself all the time, or like in the moment, if that makes sense. And I guess, do you feel like you have time and brain capacity to look at the DBM and wonder when's the next, not Silken Tomb since you offloaded that, but like when's the next ad spawn or when's the next mechanic? Do you feel like you do that a lot?
I mean, first of all, I guess I play with this, you know, timeline weak aura.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I see what's coming up, but usually, I mean, I'll do that a lot more, like, you know, on random bosses that you don't pull that many times. So so I don't know, Rashanan maybe, or like, oh yeah, when are the next ads? You know, I probably should have
Yeah.
my cooldowns for the ads, because that's the job on the Fight of Fury Warriors, like kill the ads, right? That's the one thing. But I think like I don't know, like I don't think I usually look that much for those type of things, because you usually get, at least for the harder bosses like the end bosses, you get into like the pacing of how the fight works, and you usually don't have to think about that. And
Yeah.
especially for something like that, when the ads spawn like on what's it called, on Queen Ansarek, right? Like I don't have to care about when the ads spawn, because I know that, or because I've already planned out my cooldowns, right? So similar to like how a healer would do it, I would also plan out my cooldowns, say like, well, I'm a Fury Warrior, and my job is to kill those small ads in the last phase of Ansarek, right? So I just know, well, when I see those, I smash my cooldowns, everything that's ready. Because I've looked up ahead of time. Yeah, well, first time in the phase, yeah, you have everything. Second time, you only have Bladestorm and Odin's Fury, blah, blah, blah. And you just sort of get into the habit of just using them. And you don't really care when it happens. But obviously, it will happen at the same time every time, but there's no decision to be made, like, because there's nothing dynamic about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but what do you use all the brain power you've received from offloading? What do you use it for? Is it just looking at your feet, trying to live? Like what
I think
what do you think you gain from this?
I mean, I think like now, as I get older, I realize I just don't have any brain power, so that's why I have to upload everything. um, no, but I mean, I guess like, yeah, I mean, obviously, like, yeah, looking at, I think, a lot of the harder bosses in Mythic, for melee, you have to look a lot around your feet. You have to usually dodge a lot of stuff, move around a lot, and then just playing my like rotation. But yeah, you probably don't like use like your full brain capacity or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I probably like, if I didn't have this like execute thing, it's very possible that, yeah, I would have stood in an extra silken tomb or whatever, because I would have been thinking about this random thing. Those type of things, I think, could
This
definitely
is
happen.
really this is starting to make sense to me now. I hope I can explain it properly, but it's like we're both trying to offload specific things, or the things that are relevant to us as people or to us as our role, right?
Yeah.
And I'm mainly trying to make it so I can pay attention to the ever-changing raid frame and do the proper. Like I'm focusing on my rotation. I can't get any sort of rotation help that will gain me any more healing. I have to put my focus on the frames and my buttons and play that accordingly. And the thing I feel like healers in general have the least amount of brain power over for is actually looking at their feet. I don't think it comes. I think most people can relate to their healers dying more or their worse healers dying more than they should, right? Like a disc priest standing in fire type of
Yeah.
situation. And I guess that's the difference where that's sort of where the brain power runs out if you're gonna try and pay attention to the frames, which is effectively paying real close attention to your ever-changing rotation. It's just not that the button doesn't change, but your target changes all the time. And I guess it's the same with you, where you're trying to sort of alleviate brain power so you can put focus around your feet and whatever. And I think you can say that for melee as well, that worse melees die a lot more. Or guilds can probably relate to their melee dying to stuff they shouldn't die to.
I mean,
And that's,
I think it's probably true that worse players die more in general. I think that's probably true of all
yeah, that's
role
true. I
classes.
meant their worse melees, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair summation of this. Yeah, I think that's
You know, I
that's
did something different on the last boss now that the liquid reminder thing came out.
Mhm.
So I had the option of so I tried that one out just to see how it worked, and it ended up being perfect for me. So I used both a weak aura to track my ERT as well as the liquid reminder, and that's basically because I feel like I've been you're put in a sort of weird position as a preemptive healer, where you need the case weak aura, the ERT weak aura, in order to plan out your healing cooldowns. And the more you plan out, the better, or the more that's scripted, the better, right? But half of the healers, they need to know way in advance when there's gonna be a cooldown coming, right?
Yeah.
So this Terraplate Preservation Evoker, which is very easy, you just need to press Consume Flame on a person that has Dream Breath on it, and you go boom, right? There's no actual ramp or anything, but you need to have Dream Breath up on someone, and you need the Engulf Consume Flame cooldown to be active, and that's 30 seconds. So what I've been doing this tier is I planned out my Engulfs, which is my big healing, and the purpose for doing this is just so I can look at the area where I have my weak aura and see, is there an Engulf coming? And if I don't see an icon, or the icon is like 28 seconds, then I know if I'm at full charges or just got one charge back, I can click on it and I can get it back for the designated time, right?
Yeah.
When I played Disc, it was the other way around, where I just needed to know so I could have the healing at the time it's specified, right? Because you need to ramp for like 13 seconds. But now with the introduction of the liquid aura, I use that as sort of the it's coming soon reminder, because I felt like I've been worse with this because it's difficult to have something pop up 30 seconds in advance and also have it present enough so you notice it when it's on 3 seconds, you know? I think this is what some of the audio cues have come from. I've just not liked them. And another great thing about the liquid one is that when you press the button that shows up, so if I see an engulf button, when I press engulf, it disappears. So that becomes sort of a short cue for me, like you need to press this now-ish. And when you do, it goes away. So that's been perfect. So I've been able to have my 30-second warning, like actually top left of my screen, and I just look at it when I want to know. And I've used sort of the liquid reminder as in, this is happening now, like you need to press rewind or whatever. And that's been actually really, really, really good. I feel like that liquid reminder, functionality-wise, is super great, since it's so dynamic. Like your spell reflect, like you said, but it's way, way easier to set up, right, for specific points in the fight.
Yeah, I might use that as well. I think like for example, like on Brute Twister, like when I have my shockwave, for example, you know. So like
Yeah.
that would be like I was doing some weird shit with that. I just set up some manual weak aura, but that would have been such a good thing to, you know, just be able to drag that in some small GUI and just be like, yep, now it's up, you know.
Yeah, I think the liquid reminder thing is going to be a game changer. Maybe someone else creates a copy that's not paywalled. But basically, it can both read your ERT note and you can edit in the actual add-on with the timeline. So it's sort of great to plan your fight and you can set up all the reminders. But then you can also like quickly in between puts, like, oh, I need a shockwave here-ish, you know, where you can just toss it in.
Yeah.
And it's super quick. And yeah, I felt like that worked really well because there is I mean, imagine you need to have a space for reminders. You need to see them 30 seconds in advance. And you also don't want to forget when it's 3 seconds left. It's kind of a weird thing to set up on your screen. And sometimes you have one reminder. Sometimes you have, if we're talking 30 seconds, you can have 8 reminders, you know?
Yeah.
Like maybe you need to use utility and a pot and some person is assigned and it's just a cluster of things. So that was really good. I feel like if I didn't need to know that much in advance, so if I wasn't healing on one of these healers, I would just have the liquid reminder or the case reminder, but with a really, really short time interval to make it super annoying so you wouldn't miss it, you know?
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Maybe healers can relate to this, but it's been really difficult to make it, to find the sweet spot of annoying when it's always up to some extent, right?
Yeah.
But do you actually use an ERT note or something like that to plan your cooldowns ahead of fights?
No.
You just plan them in your head?
Yeah, exactly. Because usually, like when you get to a fight, depending on if there are logs or not, right? If there are no logs, you just send on cooldown, you know. But then usually, otherwise, if there are logs, so you can see other people or whatever, or even if there are like VODs or whatever, you can look at like, okay, so you know, when do you use them? And then you usually, when you've pulled the fight a few times, you'll know, oh yeah, I'm using here, and then you sort of kind of, you know, just learn about it. But yeah, I could definitely do it. But usually, it's pretty obvious. Like, I feel like there's only really two ways that it goes, right? Either you're just sending on cooldown, or you're waiting for a specific moment, like, oh yeah, now on like Silken Court, like this is the damage amp, or on Queen Anne's Rack, oh yeah, now are the ads or whatever, right? Like it's very rare, I think, that you don't like. It's very rare that you don't do one of the two things, right? Where either you're just waiting for some specific thing to happen in the fight, which makes it very obvious to use them, or you're just using them on cooldown. Like I don't see like any other case than those two cases, basically. So because of that, it usually becomes pretty easy to remember when to use your cooldowns. So I don't really use them like that.
I think maybe it could be worth to set up sort of a system where you set up reminders for yourself not to do something. Like maybe you can see a fight and you can clearly see that at this point, if I play this fight the first time, I would press rec here off CD, right? but you see that ad spawn in like 8 seconds or whatever an interval would be where it would be worth to hold it, right? Maybe it would make more sense as a sug to just set up like red icons, as in do not press rec here, and wait for the next opportunity to press rec.
Yeah, I could definitely sort of see it. But usually the way the warrior cooldowns work is like you don't need an opportunity. Like you just press and you don't have to think about it, if that makes sense. But I did have like a very I had this exact thing pretty much on what's that boss called? The second to last boss in Abrus, Echo Naltharion. So the way that fight worked, right, was that he did these like big circles around him that you had to run out from. I don't remember what that mechanic was called, but you just ran
Heart?
out. What did you say?
Heart? Something?
No, not that one. Like you ran away from the boss. Like the boss did like the
no
AOE
clue.
around him. Like standard. Run away, and then you move the boss after. But it just so happened, and this was when you played like a build on Fury Warrior that meant that you basically had like 35-second cooldowns or something. Like you had every 35 seconds you had cooldowns, and then the first in the very first time in the fight that he would cast his ability was like 40 seconds in. So if you on pull cast your cooldowns, and then immediately when they became ready, you just did the cooldowns again. Then you had this exact situation where then you would be in your cooldowns as he was casting this, and you would have to run away and be AFK during your cooldowns. Yeah. So I guess that's a kind of a third case where it's not that you're waiting or holding anything, it's just that you're not doing it because whatever's happening now, you're not able to hit the boss or whatever.
Yeah.
But then I had a weak aura that I made for myself, which just popped up at like whatever the time that my cooldowns usually would become ready. So maybe like 30 seconds, like because that was like the lower limit of when they could become ready. And it just said, don't pop cooldowns in like huge purple text over the whole screen. Just I wouldn't, because otherwise you're so used to just slamming them on cooldown on that fight. But specifically at that point in the fight, they would always overlap in this way.
Makes sense.
So yeah, something like that. But I don't have a more advanced system for it. But maybe now with these type of liquid weak or whatever becoming like more of a public thing, maybe I'll set up something, or I'll make something of my own if I feel like it's if I just need something simpler. But it's just nice to have some form of abstraction over it where you don't need to just like manually make it every time.
Yeah, I found it very useful. I didn't use it super much, but I think I'm also like I didn't use that on demand changing of reminders, but I think that's mainly because I have to plan it out way in advance, right? So I've already done that, but highly recommend on that add-on. It worked really well, and I'm gonna guess it's gonna keep working better. I'm trying to think if there was something else regarding to this offloading I wanted to speak about. I think I just want to wrap it up maybe with, I think you can vaguely, abstractly define it as you have the present, you have the future, and you have sort of the fight or your feat. And to me, it feels like pick two,
You mean
maybe you can you can't do it's very hard to do them all three perfectly.
But
like either you're a Sug that doesn't die, but you have no clue about what's happening in the fight, or you're doing your rotation really well and you're planning ahead, but you're not looking at your feet. Because I don't think you can offload it all. I think you can, if you have these three, present, future, and let's just say fight, you can offload one and you can focus on one, and the third one you actually need to be a gamer to manage as well. And now I'm not talking about playing it decently. I'm talking about playing it, really great.
Yeah, I don't know if you would know anything about playing it great, but that's a whole different story. But yeah, it's actually nice that you bring this up, because I had one more thing I wanted to bring up on this that is very much, I think, related to this sort of pick two kind of thing.
Okay.
And so currently, the guy who is rank 1 of all warriors in M+, he's been a few times in the past as well. You know him as like Noxiv. So side note, pretty cool that they play like 5 off meta specs because they always just play the same shit, and they're still like 3.5k score, which is pretty high. So they're like basically 1 key level below the absolute highest keys right now. So that's pretty banger. But what I wanted to say was that this guy, he has like basically natty Bliss UI with no no weak auras, realistically, nothing. And he clicks like, I saw him like his like thing to focus target something, and that's something he just clicks on his bar. And his pot, he just clicks on his bar, like it's like super unoptimized in that sense. But and I can only assume because he doesn't track enough information to correctly make those type of decisions, that I spoke about before. He doesn't track enough information, I think. So I don't think it's possible that he would make all those correct decisions. But I assume what ends up happening instead is that whatever the loss of doing that is probably like, at least in the case of Fury War, is pretty low. It's like it's not that important which builders and which spenders and exactly when you rampage. Or it's not like, it's a few percent or whatever here and there, but it's not that much. But what he probably does instead then, or what sort of becomes his thing, is that he has no distractions. He just has he just sees his character and he's just fucking chopping away at his different things. And then I guess he probably has like this, whatever you call the fight or the whatever, like this whole thing. He probably has like fucking super in tune with everything of that because he doesn't have any other distractions or anything to think about. So even though he probably makes more like random rotational mistakes than other people, because he doesn't have the same sort of information that he could, or at least compared to what he could have if he had all that information. Maybe that still becomes worth it because maybe he has better uptime and he dies less or whatever, these other random things, because it's just more in tune with what's actually happening around him. Which is also another which I guess is another way to play the game, because like again, you can't like, of course, if you're like Giga gamer, Revis, whatever type of person, maybe you can do it all or whatever, but most people, you probably can't really do everything. And so maybe, making some random sacrifice like this, maybe that can be worth it,
I think I know you and I know your setup, and I don't think like your UI has changed much in the last 6 years, right? Like it's been the same.
Yeah, it's been pretty much the same, yeah.
And I think for me it's a different story because as I mentioned earlier, but I got more and more add-ons and weakars, which is a great thing, and I moved more and more stuff into the center of my screen and started being a lot better with my DPS, with my HPS, with just looking cool on the meter and everything, right? And I've intentionally strayed away from that over the past few years, where I've moved stuff further and further and further out from my screen and removed a bunch of information, to where now I'm basically playing Blizzard standard UI with like some few instances of buffs on my screen. On the classes I'm most comfortable on, I have the less clutter on my screen. And it's just become obvious to me, I don't know if it's age, I think I'm as good as the game as I've ever been, probably the best at the game currently. And I have way less, as you would call it, like possibility to have all the information to make the purely optimized mathematical decision in the moment. But I still feel like my HPS and my performance and everything has gone up in the whole, because I need to see my screen. I need to see if I can move to the right or to the left, and I need to realize that it doesn't really matter if I have 2% increase here or there. I just need to play out the fight properly. Like the top log, at least for the healers on the fight, is not really the one who has pressed his buttons in the coolest manner. It's just, it's timing, it's fluidity in the fight or something, #deep, And I don't know if there's been a shift with other players, but I feel like most people are playing this sort of weak aura pack everything very center of the screen and trying to see everything around their character, but directly sacrificing vision around the character. And I've actively moved away from that, which is kind of random, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because that's the way you used to play. Like you know, if I look back, there are actually videos of me like playing like in Cataclysm or whatever on YouTube. And if I look at my UI then, it's like bog standard fucking Bliss UI. Everything is just around the edges of the screen. Like the entire middle of my screen is completely free. You can see everything.
Yeah.
And you know, that's like this. You know, that's my dream. That's what I want. I just want. I want to. I want to like do Alt Z, hide my entire UI and just play. That would be so awesome. Like it was so in tune with. You can see everything, you know. But that's not realistic, of course. So you have to make some sort of sacrifice, I guess. And
Yeah.
I've thought so much about how to do this, but there are just some pieces of information that you just can't get rid of reasonably, or I wouldn't be comfortable getting rid of them. But maybe that comes down to like who you are as a person. Like I don't want I don't like I don't feel like I don't want to actively know that I make the wrong decision all the time because I couldn't know. And I get that just feels wrong to me. Like it just I don't know. I can't play like that.
Yeah.
But in some sense, I wish I would. You know, because I feel like that would be really, really nice. You know.
I feel like I'm just gonna send you a picture of my UI. I don't know if you've seen my UI in a bit, but I feel like I've just because I do recall that feeling, and I loved it when I had everything in the center of my screen. But it's not like I've changed my UI quite a bit over the years, trying to find something that fits. I felt like a healing UI is impossible since you have the RAID frame. But over the past year, I think I've moved everything out from the center like 15 pixel at a time, 12 times or something. And this is not great for the viewer, but this is my UI now. And that's all the weakers I have for my evoker. And the left vertical column is just showing active buffs. Maybe it's 2 or 3 active at once. And then my raid frames is to the left under my player frame. And I feel like this is super minimalistic compared to what most people play. Or super not cluttered in the center of the screen. And I don't know why, I just felt like it got... Maybe it's more mechanics, maybe it's age, I don't know, but I felt like, fuck, I need to see my character. And I don't really care about having a big-ass icon of my resource in the middle of the screen. I can look a bit top left to see my resource when I care, you know?
Yeah, but yeah, I get it. But like I think for me, like I would like to get to some point where like, you know, it is even less cluttered. I don't think it's too cluttered for me, but I would really like to have even less. But I mean, for example, like as you said, like you don't care to have your resource bar in the middle. Like, given how the warrior specs, how integral to every decision you make your rage bar is, I can't have that somewhere else because I need to constantly be aware of that. You know. So it just becomes a weird thing where like if I don't keep track of this, then I'm just giving up a lot of information. And if I move that off center or away, then I'm just going to be looking there instead. You know.
But I think it's sort of, I think that's the pitfall one can walk into. I'm not sure that this is the best, but I think the common, what I used to do, and I did this for like 10 years, was you have your rotation, like your cooldowns, your resource and everything in the middle of your screen, sort of, right? Like where your character is, so you can see your feet while you're seeing your rotation. And I feel like that hasn't, for some reason, I've ended up on that not being the best solution for me, and moving away like I'm still looking a lot on my bars, but my bars are at the bottom of my screen. And that looked dumb to me 2, 3, 4 years ago. Like, why would you, that's so inoptimal to have your rotation at the bottom. You want to see your feet. But I feel like the time is better spent looking at my rotation for 1 second and looking at my feet for 1 second, but actually being able to see my feet. So if I had a rage bar here, I would just have it on my action bar, sort of bottom-ish on the screen, like a classic UI. Like a classic UI with a rage bar above the action bars, you know? I feel like for me that's a better solution, and I did not think like this until like a year ago or something.
What you're saying is essentially then like
The positioning.
yeah, but like most people will say will have some version of I have a I have everything centered around my character so that I will see my character when I look at my rotation. But
Yeah,
you're saying I'm going to move it away from my character, have nothing around my character, or you have some things, but you're going to move it away and you're going to say, well, instead of looking at my rotation and seeing my character, when I look at my rotation, I will not see my character, but I will be looking back and forth all the time instead.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's become way. I'm not saying that. I don't think it's the most optimized thing in theory, but I think in practice, I can say at least for me, it's way better because I for sure die less and I for sure do as much healing. I'm probably just dying less on progress pulls and I'm still min-maxing the rotation as best as I can by the end of progress, right? Maybe on something like sick run, this is not the optimal UI setup if you could swap back and forth, right? Because then maybe you're better off just seeing your rotation and your character sort of at the same time. But I feel like once the fights are getting complicated, and for me, once I got better at the game, having information on specific parts on the screen that I can look at, but having the middle of my screen visible so I can see mechanics, see my feet, has become increasingly important. And I feel the exact same way in PvE as I do in PvP, where like it is kind of important to look around you and get the complete circumstance, But at the loss of having to look around more, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this looking back and forth kind of thing, I feel like that is maybe that works for like a healer or some different things, but or something that has a very like basic rotation, or like you don't really have like that much to your like core rotation. But if you play something like a fast play paced like melee, like Fury Warrior or whatever, like just stuff happens all the time. Even again, not all decisions really matter, so maybe you could just ignore it. But if you actually tried to do the rotation properly, this would never work. There's no way that you could try to properly do it with thinking about all these different things, and then you have to look back and down and forth because it's just paced way too quickly. There's just too
Yeah, but
many like
I don't agree with. I guess what you're assuming is that your peripheral vision is so exaggeratedly bad if you move your UI down like a decimeter, Like we're not talking about huge amount of distance here. When you're looking at your action bars, if they're down, you still see your character. If you're looking at your action bars but they're right at your feet, you see your character a bit better in your peripheral vision, but it's not all or nothing,
Yeah, no,
Like
but that doesn't align with what you just said, right? Like about pinging back and forth. Then you're still saying that you somehow see your character from where you're looking now, right? That's
yeah.
still, that's two
Of
different
course, I
things.
see my character, but I see it, uh, worse. It's not the. It is what I mean, but it's not the correct way to say it. Like you see a more blurred version of your character, I suppose. Like if fire just spawned underneath my feet, and I'm looking at the action bar, I'm guessing I'm gonna die to it more if I never look up, so to say. But when I look up and there's fire all over the place, I feel like you can do the better decision, and in that way, it's definitely not a guaranteed DPS loss by having your rotation a bit less focused. Like it's all a give and take, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, yeah, that's fair. I mean, again, like as you know, I also don't have my rotation under my character. Like that's not how my UI looks either. I have my rotation, if you will, to the left side of my character instead,
yeah,
to keep my character's feet more clean, I guess. But still, I still have other stuff, a bit below my character as well. But I don't have my rotation there, which is the most common way that people have it set up nowadays. But yeah,
yeah,
I
but
think
you
that
still have a big, you have a big square of, you have a big clump on your screen that's your rotation, and it's really close. it's killing the left side of your character view, right?
Yeah, kind of. I
But
mean,
it
it's like it's slightly closer, I guess, than yours, but it's not that much closer, I think, than yours.
yeah.
But yeah, I have more icons, or I have more width because I have several rows of or several
Yeah.
columns of icons, I guess.
But I think it's quite funny how I feel like the whole community went towards Blizzard UI is bad, or like you need really big weak aura packs in the middle of your screen to be able to do DPS well. And I don't think I don't think it's a trend to start moving away, but I mean the vast majority are either have gone that path and gotten more and more and more weak auras, or there's some people that just refuse them and have just gotten very few, you know. But I don't know. It feels to me just now when I'm thinking about looking at like Race the World First POVs and looking at like SCO UI and Maris UI and all these great players, the center of their screen is entirely fucked. And most new players you see come in, or some of the new players you come in and see doesn't seem to take this aggressive of an approach. People are still having it quite close to the screen, but there seemed to be a gain to not having everything on your character, because there can be a more loss than gain.
Yeah, I think what sort of stops me from making like a more, what do you call it, like I guess like making more of a shift here is like, because I've thought about this a lot, like what could I do to make my like everything around my character more clear, like, and I thought about some different things that I could do to make it a little bit better, maybe. But the problem that I come back to is that you still need to have a lot of other things outside of your rotation being shown and being visible easily to yourself, you know.
Yeah.
So for example, you need to see your focus targets cast bar, and you need to see your targets cast bar, and you need to see your party's HP or whatever. Maybe you need to see some of your party's cooldown. You definitely need to see your party's kicks. You need to see the debuffs on yourself, a lot of these things. So every solution that I've come up with always still leads me to have a lot of things that end up in that general area, because I can't just remove things that I need to see. And I've come to the point where I've accepted that I'm not going to have a very nice tracking of like group hard CC, so like AoE stuns, AoE fears, whatever. I just don't have a great hard tracker for that centralized somewhere, because that just took up a lot of space, and I felt like I just never really use it in the way that it works out if you play like serious keys. It's relatively easy to just call it, and usually someone will be like, yeah, I'll do next or whatever, you don't need to have someone delegate out necessarily exactly what's happening there. But something like kicks, I mean, I feel like you need to like there's no way you can be a good player in M+ if you're not tracking everyone's kick cooldowns and having a good sense of that, right? Because even if no one says anything, I mean, you see this, but you see people who don't do it. Like you see this in groups, right? Where someone dies to a cast that's casting on them, and they're the only person who has kick ready, and then they type in chat, "What the fuck, no kick?" And if you have the kick weak warrior, you're looking at this person like thinking, "What a fucking moron!" He was the only person with a kick. He saw he was targeted with a cast, and he just stands there and dies. And you don't want to be like. At least I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person who didn't know I was the only one who had a kick. That just seems crazy to me. Even if I'm not going to call a kick or anything, it's such a valuable piece of information, right?
For sure.
And so I just feel like it's very hard to, it's very hard to set up a UI where everything will be clear around your character, but you can still see all of this information. But you said one thing that really sort of resonated with me, which is something I've been doing a little bit, but I think I can do more as well, which is that over time, at some point, you can just say like, okay, I'm just going to move everything 5 pixels further away now, or I'm going to make everything 3% smaller or whatever, right? And then you do that, and then you get used to it, and then you play with it, and then 1 month later you do it again, and you kind of keep doing that. Because if you try to say, I'm going to make everything 30% smaller, you're gonna hate it. It's not gonna be good, right? But when you do it like gradually, you can kind of get yourself used to it. I think that's a
Yeah.
good tip maybe for people who feel like they have too much clutter and don't feel like you can remove more information, is to just like try to see like how much can you gradually move things away, how much can you gradually make things smaller without it
Yeah.
hurting your gameplay, and just do it like in, because at some point, surely at some point, when you make it like another 3% smaller or move it another few pixels, you just feel like that never feels good, and then you can just move it back, right? But just you can keep trying that over time.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say say the same thing, because I did this unintentionally, right? And I just realized, sort of now when we're talking about it, that I've done this so many times where like, oh, it's not enough. I need to move it further, Like I haven't been trying to get to a further out point. I've just been trying to get more visibility without it feeling awkward,
Yeah.
And so far it's been great, but just like your mind with limited resources, the screen is a very limited resource as well. And I feel like the raid frames has been a big culprit in my life the last 6 years, where like there's just no perfect solution. You need a raid frame visible as a healer, and that's really annoying.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, like this whole thing with like what stops me from doing this more is that it's so annoying. Because okay, so let's say that so as I mentioned, like I have on my left side of my characters, right, I have a little bit of a block of like bars, right, that I have my abilities on, and then I have some weak auras that are anchored to them or whatever. But reasonably, I could very easily move those, and I could rescale the icons or whatever. That's pretty easy. But let's say I change the size and I move this block slightly out further away from my character. Well, now this is starting to move into where I have my timeline weak aura. And okay, but then I'll move that. But now that is starting to go into where I have my party frame. And,
Yeah.
and it becomes this weird, annoying chain effect, and you have to change so many things. And that is annoying. That's kind of a feels bad situation, where you kind of like, it becomes such a big project, and then if you didn't like it or whatever. But yeah, I think I should try to do that more. But it's just annoying because of the whole chain reaction kind of thing.
I agree for sure, and I think because of that, a proper first step maybe would be to look at your UI. Like I do this quite a lot when, like now I've been PvPing a lot, right? And I record my PvP sessions, and I've been fixing my UI by looking back at the VOD and looking at my UI afterwards, right? Because it's very hard to try and fix it in game, or like try to pay attention to it in game, because you're paying attention to other stuff. And I think there's two things you can look for. First is, am I displaying anything on the screen I honestly do not look at, like to a point where it helps me, or that it's probably not worth the real estate or the brain capacity to look at this. And it could be something like people tracking basic buffs like heroism, if that really changes your life, or it can be other stuff like party CDs. Am I looking at all of these CDs? Do I really care if you have shards ready, or whatever you could have? And then there's two steps from there. Most of the time, I feel like the edges of your screen can be used very well for information you need sometimes, but information you don't really need to be presented in your face. I think you see this in Gingy's UI, for an example, where he has like ERT notes or ERT bars, like at the top of his screen or at the bottom or something, right? Where like he needs to see Stampeding Roar at some point, but he really does not know. For 98% of the time, he does not care about Stampeding Roar, right?
Yeah.
And that's a really good practice I try to pick up on when adjusting or when restructuring my UI, where like you can put something like my 30-second ERT timer. I just put it in Africa. I look at it quite a bit, but I never need to accidentally see it, So it's also a part of prioritizing where you put your information on the screen, and a lot of stuff you can really put in awkward places, like bottom left, top left, whatever you have, however UI looks. But the point I'm trying to make is just some things you don't need at all, worth considering, and some things you need to very rarely know, but it's important. So have it, but make it small and put it to the side. you know?
Yeah.
I could imagine that something like your stun rotation is, to me, would be sort of that example where you realize you don't really look at it that much, but surely there's an instance where you're in a key and you know that there's going to be stops needing to happen because someone died. Your rotation isn't your immediate concern. Maybe it is worth to look bottom right above your details or whatever, just to have the information. Like, by the way, we don't have any stops, or the only stop we have is this sphere or something, you know?
Yeah, but I feel like the problem with that is that, and that's why I think that pretty much no one plays like that, is that you can't, like, it becomes so hard to, because then you get to this point where, like, okay, you're looking at everything that's happening around you. Obviously, you still have to somewhat do your rotation, even if you wing that without looking, that's fine. But you still have to look at what's happening, and you still have to see, like, when is this, or like, what potential costs or whatever is actually coming up. Am I standing in some ground effect or whatever? So if you're then gonna look in your corner of your screen for like who has a stun ready, that just becomes such a hard, I don't know. It just becomes such a much less likely thing to happen, which is why I think like most, if you see people like pushing high keys that, you know, either I guess call this or track this in some very clear way. They usually track it more centrally, or at the same place they track like kick cooldowns or their target casts, or they just do it in some place where they already have information rather than putting it to the side. So yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
but I
know.
think I get what you mean, but I kind of have the opposite take to this, where I feel like the person that are designated to call and communicate and sort this obviously need to see it in a good place. But to me, it's information that everyone should be able to access, and that's something you can declutter your Omni CD if you have, because a lot of people just have all the shit there, right? And if you're looking for you're in a unfamiliar or a weird situation and you need a stun and you're not sure what you have, you don't want to look through your Omni CD list on your party frame. That's not effective at all. So you can just remove that and put it in an ERT cooldown bar or icons. Put it somewhere on your screen that has space but you don't really look at. And that becomes sort of the designated place to look for party cooldowns that you rarely but sometimes have great value of being able to call. And that can be raid cooldowns in raid, for example, as a DPS, right? Or externals or something. Like, you probably want to be able to see who has externals in raid as a DPS in case you need to specifically call it because you've messed up. But that information is not used enough to have a good place in your UI.
Yeah,
But access to it is great,
but that's
in
like,
my opinion.
yeah, but I think like that example is more like the way that would likely be used is like, oh shit, I used my personal here because I fucked up, and I'm not gonna have it for this next point where I need a personal or whatever. So then you would almost like look that up like ahead of time or something. Oh shit, yeah, but there's a PS ready. Maybe I can ask for that or something.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't know if that would be super useful if like, oh shit, I stood in this thing here. Can I call for a? Oh wait, let me look what we have available, and then you go down and try to find which thing is ready. I don't know if that would be super useful. Like maybe, but I feel like at that point you just want to scream in Discord like external, external, I'm gonna die.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know, like it just like it depends on like the use case. If it's something that you can just, oh yeah, I might need to know this information soon, then yeah, I'll check it.
Yeah, but you also have to take in context of the time span here. If something is about to kill you in 1 second in a key, you wouldn't look down top left on your screen or look up top left on your screen and try and sort for stuns. You would also just call, we need a stop, 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 right? But I mean, 5 seconds is a very plausible time scenario, and 5 seconds is a long ass time. Like, you can look top left on your screen, you can find the only not gray button, you can look back at your character, you can calmly say, we need to fear next. Like, I understand where your point is coming from, but I feel like the scenario doesn't, or probably isn't often as time crunched as it seems to me like you're imagining. Because I get the example, I don't agree that the scenario is the same as I'm standing in fire. I need to look at the list of externals. You know.
Yeah, but I think like in this case with like if you want to go back to the stun or whatever, right, or fear or whatever, I feel like it's not you would have to really get used to that view, because if you're just gonna, because usually if you do something like this, you have like 8, 10 whatever abilities that you're actually tracking, right? So it's not easy. Maybe you would have to get used to that whole setup. It's not easy at a glance to just go down there. I feel like it's more of an investment to go and look at this, and actually, figure out. Oh wait, which ones are ready? Which one is that? Whatever. Who am I gonna call for here? And especially the way that M Plus has been now for a while. Maybe this is like a melee take, but you can't look away 3 seconds from your character. You will be dead. Like you're always dead. Like it doesn't matter. Like there's so much like weird ground clutter. You'll just be dead if you just look away for a few seconds and not like pay attention to your character, which maybe is a problem in and of itself. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like it's I don't know. I definitely agree with the general sentiment of like it's good to move away information out, but I feel like it's way more true if that is information that you can calmly look up ahead of time when you know something's going to happen. But the more likely something is that it's going to be needed in the heat of the moment, if you will, I feel like it becomes a lot less useful.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think we're not agreeing on what the heat of the moment is, or how long it takes to look down on your screen, or how difficult it will be to find that information.
Yeah, I think that we have the same general sentiment, and then I guess it's just where you draw the line between different.
Different I think things. My eyes are just 20 times faster than yours.
Could be, yeah. I need to go and track my eye speed, see if I.
But it is a thing you get used to for sure. It is somewhat of an investment, like you're saying. But obviously, you need to. We shouldn't digress too much, but you would present information differently depending on what you're seeking from it. If you're looking at a quick glance, sort of what's available, you actively need to have something that doesn't show. Like you don't really care about how many cooldowns you have in total. You don't really care to see in super close detail if something is ready in a minute or two. Like I would just heavy desaturate the on cooldown ones and sort the ready ones on top, which you can do in ERT. And I mean, I've literally done this with cooldowns. I have them on different places on the screen depending on what I've done for the season, but I've always had them and I've always looked at them. And I've done this exact process with just these cooldowns where like I really care just to see in a quick glance what's ready. And for me, that's a colorful icon, and everything else, it doesn't even go through my mind,
The thing is, I had a really great system for this in Legion. There was a week where I don't know if you had it or if you used it.
I hated it. Worthless.
You hated it? You know which one I'm talking about?
So much information. Yeah, I know exactly.
You know the text...
Send tracker.
No.
Okay, sorry.
No, completely different thing. No, I was talking about tears cooldowns.
No.
It was like it was before like send tracker or before these different things. But basically it was like I think maybe it was merged into send tracker later. I don't know, but it disappeared. Or I think maybe send tracker was like cited as the reason why this disappeared, like, or why people didn't, or why they didn't support it anymore or whatever. But basically it was like very simple, like very small text that you would just put, and it would just list all the cooldowns. Like it would be like per, I don't remember if it was per player or per class or whatever the exact splitting was, but it would just be like small lines of text and then color coded if they were ready or not or whatever, and it would just be like a text with a cooldown or whatever, or it would just say ready. But the thing with this was that because of the way that it was laid out, was that even though the entire week or itself, it could cover a pretty large portion of your screen, like way bigger than your character or whatever, but it was like spaced out in a way where like it was just like random small lines of text in like a pretty large area. But it was pretty easy. Like if you ever were gonna look at something like this, you could just glance over and you would see it. But if you didn't really focus on it, you could barely see it was there, because it was like, in general, it was like transparent, right? It was just a bunch of text on your screen, but you could look through it if you imagine like really sparse text. And that really worked out for me, but that
Mm.
disappeared. And I probably can find you a video about this from myself playing in Legion after this and show you what I mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I kind of liked that approach to it because then it was like I can put it in a relatively. I'm obviously not going to put it like exactly on my character or anything, but I can put it in like relatively good screen real estate. But it doesn't. I can basically look through it if that makes sense. I guess that's another
Yeah.
thing you can think about. Maybe having like everything transparent so you can see through it. That's another option, I guess. You put everything centralized, but it's transparent so you can see through it.
I think a lot of people get caught up in sort of the design or the visual appeal of the UI, where like everything is the same, like all the bars are like black or something, and they all have the same transparency and whatever. And it's just I think people are letting the design affect the practicality of it. And in my mind, you need to have different design depending on what you're going to use it for, right? Like something like your rotation, you obviously care about all the buttons at all times. Like you want to, at a quick glance, be able to see in what cooldown they have, how they're going to line up, and whatever, right? But as soon as you're talking about information that's very important in very few moments at a quick glance, you're not going to want like the classic ERT 15 bars, on top of each other, not sorted, all full color, no matter if they're on cooldown or not. Of course, there's some personal preference to what sort of design is easy to see, but it for sure plays a massive difference for me how I set up my weak auras or ERT cooldowns, Omni CD, whatever, depending on its use case. Because not only looking at a specific part of the screen for a specific part of information is very easy to get accustomed to. And then, yeah, you don't always care about all the details, right? So sort out the details if you don't really care about them, and it becomes a lot better.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of people have a different take to us here, but I think both of us are very much like function over form, whereas a lot of people
Yeah.
are like form over function, which I think to me that's just I don't really understand it. I'm not that kind of like a design person or whatever. I'm just function all the way or whatever. But yeah, I know a lot of people really want their UI to look nice or whatever. I could not care less, and people have been telling me like my UI is ugly or whatever for years. I just don't care. Like it's not. I don't care. But yeah, I think that's also if that's important to you, then then you
But
probably have to
even
sacrifice some quality for if you really want to make everything pretty.
I feel like even if let's take the example of these like black UIs that go about, that just everything is black, right?
Yeah.
Everything is black and gray, which is for the untrained eye at least, but it isn't very obvious to look at because that's very much design over function or whatever you called it.
Yeah, form over function.
Form over function. So let's take this stun or CC in M plus ERT tracker as an example. In my head, they could still have their black and gray design, whatever, but they just would have to do something to sort of the irrelevance, even if it's not optimal. So let's say you just don't display anything that's on cooldown, but everything can still be full black, full contrast, whatever the appeal or whatever the design idea is, right? It is obviously a loss if you can't see that something is up in 2 seconds. But maybe you can make the weak aura show so it shows everything that's ready and available within 5 seconds, because that's the use case you see for the weak aura, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a good excuse. Not that this isn't really a big deal. I think people are just making it more difficult on themselves because you're trying to endlessly optimize. You're trying to make sure you don't lose the 3% DPS. You're trying to make sure that you could, when I'm looking at the stuns, I want to be able to see like every scenario, right? Like I want to see all the CC, single target, AoE, stun, fear, whatever. I don't want to miss a thing. And I feel like just accepting defeat and realizing that we're old and we're bad at the game, maybe it's worth to sacrifice some optimization to make sure that we're not missing the vital parts.
Yeah, and I think that this probably goes back to what I said earlier, which is like, so what I said, like, I'm not going to track all these 15 different buffs here to figure out when I'm going to press execute. I'm just going to make it glow.
Yeah.
Because you can do the same thing here, and there even is this weak aura that I don't remember if it was Liquid Max who made it or if it was someone else, but I know that he was somehow involved in that. But there was someone who made this weak aura anyway, where it just shows you the next CC that someone's going to do. So you just put in some sort of priority, and then it looks in your group what you have, and then it's just, and whatever is ready,
Yeah.
and then it just shows you the next. And then I think it shows you one more, like which one is the next in line after that. So basically, I guess it would be nice. I don't think that one looked super nice, but what would be really nice would be like just a
Have that in the
priority.
corner, you know.
What? Sorry?
Imagine just having that weak aura in the corner of your screen. Wouldn't
Yeah,
that be
that could be.
great? Just so you can easily see, okay, fuck, we need to stop here for the next one. What do we have? You look, you see a shockwave icon, you just say shockwave next.
Yeah.
That's
But
that
then,
you can do in the heat of the moment, right? If the heat of the moment is 3 seconds.
But the thing is then that if you have that weak aura, then all of a sudden it's a lot less screen real estate, right? Because now it's showing one thing and not 10 things. So now maybe you can squeeze it in somewhere, higher priority real estate, right?
Or sure, if you're gonna actually use it often.
Yeah, but I guess that's the. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It depends, right? Like, I mean, yeah, it depends what your use is going to be, right? But yeah, for sure, I think it would be easier to if you definitely wanted to have it in the corner, it would be better to have such a thing where it'd be like, oh well, it's just going to show you the one thing that you're going to call. You don't have to do any manual sorting in your head or look at these different things, whatever, right?
Yeah.
You just see the icon and bam.
I think it's very easy to become scared of not being optimized or not being able to optimize every situation, you know?
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna have a week where I want to be able to actually be able to make the best decision every time, but a lot of the times the only reason you need this information is because shit's gone wrong, you know?
Yeah.
You need to realize that you just need to make the easiest way out of the bad situation, you know?
Yeah.
It's not very often you ask for a healing cooldown, I would imagine. Maybe you don't even track it, but or I don't think you have a reason to track it. But let's say you're a raid leader. Obviously, you need to track rally and panic raid CDs like this, even though it's already pre-planned, right? Like you want to be able to, oh shit, we're gonna wipe, but let's try and play 40 seconds more. Oh, very rally, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, yeah.
I think it was a good. I think this was a good topic.
Yeah, it took a bit longer than
accidental topic.
Accidental topic for 90 minutes. Yeah, I mean, I had some other topics I wanted to talk about today, but I think we can just talk about them another time. They're not really super sensitive at the time. I had one thing though that I wanted to bring up today. That I think it's not necessarily time sensitive, but it was something that I heard about this week, and I'll probably forget it. It's pretty short anyway. But last week how it spoke about like the timeline and everything, and how it seems like the timeline is pretty tight, or like sped up as compared to before.
Yes,
I heard something pretty interesting. So you know that I think it's in the middle of December, we're gonna have the Siren Isle patch, like 1107. Which is like, I don't know, it's some new island, and I don't know, you can get the ring, some ring there anyway, whatever, it doesn't matter what the content is. But what I heard, which I don't know if this was on Wowhead or something, but I heard Mystical OS, the DBM guy.
Yeah.
I heard him mention it, that apparently Siren Isle, like the island itself, that is a unused asset from BFA of a island expedition. So
Okay.
they already had this entire island created. So they could just reuse this asset that they would never have released otherwise. And then I guess they can just add whatever content onto the island, right? Like whatever this ring is. I don't know. I mean, that's probably like pretty small thing.
Yeah, for some lore and whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess like the only point that I thought was interesting was like, do you think that they can utilize this type of thing? Because I don't know. I assume like every time they release something, they end up with a lot of like unused assets. And we often see this like when there's like data mining and stuff, and then things don't make it into the game and whatever, right? like, do you think that that's maybe that can be part of the plan now? Like, if they're actually gonna, squeeze everything in, make it tighter, maybe they can, use this idea more. Where like, oh well, we already made this kind of thing. Maybe we can just kind of take what we have here and just, twist it a little bit. Which again comes back with like, horrific visions, which I guess I don't know what they're gonna do yet. We don't know, but it's probably gonna heavily build on what they already have.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that should play in, right? I have no clue how much how they've used the already created assets in the past in way past when they were intending to use it. But it seems like a smart way to make up some time, right? Like, let's say they want a mid, they sort of found the cycle of the game for the last couple or even more for the last few expansions, right? Where they have their raid released and they have 2.5 or 0.3 whatever and 0.5, and then they have some sort of filler patch that has some content, and that's been an island some of the times. There should be a lot of unused assets, as you say, that they can just reuse without it being a problem, right? They could even be systems from the past that they just didn't implement because they didn't have the time, and they can just polish it up. So I think probably, yeah, since the game is sort of in a more, they seem to have landed a bit more in the systems now, right, than before. They probably have a better opportunity of reusing unused assets.
Yeah, I think the important word there is like it's not really reuse, right? It's just utilize
Used,
or
yeah.
use,
Yeah.
systems, things that were never, released. So
These mid in between big patches is probably the best time, because I can't speak for the people who understand the lore, but obviously we don't care if we go to a dark or a bright island, right?
yeah,
We
that
don't
doesn't
really
matter.
care about what the event or the reputation they're in holds. Are we gonna pet the dragons, or are we gonna run around in motorcycles,
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know, but I'm assuming that similarly to how like the bulk of the story is in like 11.0 with the raid and everything, right? I don't think like 11.07 probably doesn't have massive story implications, right? It's probably
I
like,
wouldn't think so.
yeah, I don't know, like again, but I would expect that it's like, yeah, this
It's,
is just like some random side story that relates to the main story, right? And given that, they already have the characters or whatever, they can probably move that onto exactly whatever art asset was already existing if they wanted, right?
yeah. I mean, maybe this is the perfect solution to the. We talked last week about the season 4 of reusing old content, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna use reuse and use for the first time a bit flexibly here, but isn't the 0.7 patch the best time maybe to reuse old assets? If they can just save time on the least important patch content wise, because it's over so fast, right? Like, these patches are ran for literally a few months, then they're gone. Like, they can't be a very good money back on that investment, right? If they instead filled each major patch with some old content in between to keep it fresh and extend it for a month and work on the next tier or the tier after that, I don't know how far ahead they are. That would probably be better than just clumping the same total amount of time, but as a season 4,
Yeah, probably. Like just extending with, but the thing is like, or I don't know, but like at least for players like us, more like competitive players, we don't care about the 0.7 patch or the 0.5 patch. They never add anything to us for us, right? We only care if they come with class tuning, but the content itself is completely pointless to us, right? I guess it's like if this ring now is going to be this, yeah, we're going to go out there and do this content for 2 days, grind out, get the ring, and then we're going to be done, right? That's essentially like how that's going to work out, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But even with that said, I'm gonna guess that they're pushing advertisements and everything on the major patches, not the minor patches, right? Like, they must commit way more to 11.1 than 11.07, right?
Of course, yeah.
So it would make sense to either try stuff out or try to be cheap in whatever way you can be without sacrificing the players it's designed for. But I think we're on uncharted lore territory and everything, right? So I would guess that they can do whatever they want when they do these sort of side quests and side stories or mini patches.
But maybe I didn't understand correctly what you were saying. But like, if I'm gonna try to repeat what I thought that you wanted to say,
Yeah,
and you can
this is
tell me if
perfect.
this was wrong or not.
Yeah.
But what I thought you said was something along the lines of maybe they can use these type of things to extend each season that we have. Let's say we have 3 seasons, and they extend each season by doing these type of things, by reusing things and extend the season, and then we don't have to have season 4. So if in the 24-month cycle, instead of having 4 seasons that were 6 months, maybe we cut it down to 22 months or whatever, but we added 1 month to each season or something. That's essentially
Yeah.
what I heard from you. Was that the correct?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a spontaneous take, but to me it sounds better as us that consume the top end content, like the actual raids or even the seasons, whatever. It would spontaneously feel better if they just made each expansion, or sorry, each patch or each season a bit longer and reused or use some old assets in those patches, instead of clumping that reusability at the end of the expansion and having it all at a time. Because even now, let's look back at Dragonflight, right?
Yep.
From the moment we killed Firak, the next time we actually pulled a progress boss, I think was like 10, 11 months. Let's see. Amidrasil. Because, people talk about like Hellfire Citadel and raids like that notoriously for being so long. So we got it November 1st, November 14th, we got Amidrasil. Nerubar Palace release September 10th. So we basically had 10 months in between these raids.
Yep.
With the previous ones being about 6 months in between, right?
Yep.
It feels so long. And that year of WoW is really not satisfying, right?
Yeah, but you had season 4, but
Yeah.
yeah.
You had season 4, which I think most would agree on is not as fun as a regular season.
Yeah, I agree. But what I'm trying to
Yeah, sorry.
understand here then is like, so if you say you did this now for this patch that we're in right now,
Yeah.
what could you do for me as a player who cares about mythic raid progression and pushing high keys? That's what I care about. What can you do for me that justifies to me that you're extending the season by 1 month or 6 weeks or something? Like what like, because obviously this whole Siren Isle or whatever, this type of content, that doesn't extend anything for me. That's completely pointless to
Yeah.
me, you know. So that was that was what I was just wondering, if
Okay.
you had a idea how, because like obviously it's a lot easier when you can say, well, it's a new season, it's a new rating system, it's a new raid tier ish. I mean, even though it's,
Yeah,
I
I get it.
agree that it sucks, whatever, but it's at least something. Whereas like if you just artificially extended it by adding content that I don't do anyway, then you're just making my wait longer, you know.
Yeah. So I think we have to preface this with saying that I'm saying that I would prefer 3 slightly longer seasons without a season 4, just over a season 4. But if I want to further defend it, I would say that for your case, that if you just remove the season and extended the previous ones, so you don't get another raid tier, M plus tier, whatever, maybe you would have to do like one additional step to make it feel better, to where like maybe they commit to making some specific high-end content challenge with each 0.7 patch. And it doesn't have to be the most insane thing in the world. It could be something like a mage tower or whatever. But maybe a challenge, I don't know. I don't think I can properly motivate it in any other way that I'd rather have a slightly shorter total expansion time with padded out seasons just to avoid having the drought of no new raid release for 10 months. Because to me, the game sort of dies in that period waiting for the new expansion. And I'd rather pad out that suffering to, I don't know, make that year of WoW not feel as bad.
Right. I mean,
but if they could implement some system with these 0.7 patches that interested us, that would be great. But they obviously can't affect the raid, the M plus season or the PvP season. So then they either would have to make a cosmetic or for fun challenge that they can somehow repeat, or maybe Plunderstorm. I don't know what would make everyone happy, but I'm not sure.
I mean, I get it, but like, so I think two things from my end. It's like, first of all, like if they did this, let's say that they released something similar to Mage Tower, right, in every 0.7 patch, and that would extend the cycle then by, let's say, I guess to remove the whole long wait on the end, it would have to extend the cycle by almost 2 months, right?
Yeah,
But let's say 6 weeks or something. I don't know. Maybe that's enough. So I just look back like on Mage Tower, right, when it released this time around in. But when was that? Was that in Shadowlands? Or when did they take Mage Tower back? I don't remember. But yeah, regardless, whenever that was, I think that was in
I
Shadowlands.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, like that released on like a Wednesday in EU, right? And then during that weekend, I played that a lot. That was really fun. And as I've been accused of a lot on this podcast, correctly, I don't really play much of other classes than Warrior.
Mm-hmm.
But on that weekend, I did every challenge, which meant that I had to do it on like a bunch of different classes and specs, right? To get that mount, right? So obviously I did the Warrior one for the Transmog or whatever, but then also I did like all the different challenges, which I think required me to play 4 different characters, I think, if I remember correctly. But point being that even someone like me who doesn't play like, alts or whatever, I was still able to dunk out all of that content over one weekend. So that hardly, extends the content cycle for me by 6 weeks, right? Because I did that over 2 days now. And that's for someone who, I had never even played like Hunter before, and I think the problem is also like they can't make it like ridiculously hard either, because then like just no, like they can't make it like for the top point
Yeah, it's
001,
difficult.
right? It's just no point.
Yeah.
No one's gonna play it. So I don't know. It becomes, I don't know. It becomes hard to come up with some system like that. I think that would work. But maybe it could. The thing is, though, again, like we don't have to cater only for players like us or try hard players or whatever you want to call it, right? So maybe like Mage Tower actually added a bunch of weeks for a lot of people, right? So maybe that would have been fine. It would have probably been worse for us because we would have been done with Mage Tower over the first week or whatever. But
Yeah.
maybe for other people it would have added. So that was the one thing for me, I guess. The thing that I think would be hard would be to have something that would actually have some form of longevity for more advanced players, while not being completely inaccessible to lower end players. And then the other thing was that I agree that I think that I would rather have 3 longer tiers of the raid than what we had in season 4. But I would much rather have what we had now with season 4 in terms of M+. I would rather have 4 M+ seasons than three longer ones, I think.
Okay.
Which I think, like, obviously, the M+ season is a full M+ season in every sense, right? It's new dungeons and everything. Whereas the raid is just rehashed. But M+ doesn't really, the rehashing of M+ dungeons doesn't really feel the same,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm trying to think of argument or stuff you could do to cater to the raiders, I guess, as well. Because everything revolves around the raid, right? Like the raid, obviously there's content patch and something new, but when a raid's released, there's a new season of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, PvP is also affected by this cycle currently, for some reason. It wasn't always, but I'm not sure what you could do. I was thinking if they could like commit to having a patch where after this patch, no further class tuning is made or something. And make it like an absolute push month or whatever. But that would probably cater to an even smaller percentage than we are, right? That would probably cater to like the full-time gamers.
I didn't really follow. How would this work? You said like a month of what? Or like when would this happen?
Let's say a month or 6 weeks. The added time, what they could do for the top gamers could be to commit to not doing a single piece of tuning for the coming 6 weeks, so that everyone can push their logs, push their M+ score, push their PvP rating with nothing new going to happen. Like a Blizzard just hard commit. I don't know if this would make me slightly happy for PvP. I wouldn't care for M+, I wouldn't care for raid. Would you care about something like this?
Isn't this anyway how the last 6 weeks of any patches? Like they don't do tuning on the end, right? So I feel like
I'm not sure. Probably, yeah, but I wouldn't think that they do it religiously, so to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put it this way: I don't think like if this was like spoken out from this, like yeah, now we're tuning freeze here, you do whatever you want or whatever, it wouldn't appeal to me in any way, I guess, if that makes sense. If that's the question.
Yeah, that makes sense. You only play one class either way, right?
Yeah, so it's like buff
I was
warrior
thinking
or
about,
nothing.
Yeah, I was thinking about the integrity of the ladder or something. Could you implement a system where you gain some sort of reward by playing the last 6 weeks?
I mean, you already kind of do, right? You kind of have to play the last weeks of the season to, get your PvP rating or M+ rating or whatever, right?
Yeah, but could they like cop out and make some sort of? I mean, they could always in the last six weeks of the season, just every season, Blizzard could organize this off meta push somehow, or they could make like a separate score system for the last 6 weeks with something. I don't know. I'm just thinking on the spot. I think there are ways you could cleverly satisfy the high end people. You can make an option to like clear the raid with its pre nerf state or something, or remove the buff. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think a Blizzard Blizzard actually making like break the meta or something, doing something like that to yeah, like I don't know how it would work, but with actual rewards or whatever, that would be fun. But that's an M+ thing, and M+ doesn't have much of a problem here. I think the problem is always the raid becomes so boring, right?
Okay, but what if they just do a simple thing where they present you with, now we played the raid for the entire season, and then they just lock in the item level that Echo and Liquid, the Razor World First Guild, have on the raid, and they make it so you can click on an NPC in the start, and you can just average that item level or something, and you can pull the boss in its first iteration, like the one it was killed in. So you got the option to do a mini race or a mini raid tier with the same tier, but it's way more difficult now after weeks of farm.
Are they reverting any class tuning to the state or like?
I don't know. I think you can debate on how the item level scaling or class tuning would work. I would guess that they don't want to roll back how the classes work. Just some way try and give the player base the experience that the Race the World First have. And I think it might be possible to do since we've had months of practicing and learning, right?
But it's basically the challenge mode system in the raid. Like,
yeah,
you get like a template.
Race the World First challenge mode, yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And that's an opt-in last 6 weeks. Go ahead. See if you can kill the last boss.
And what do you get? You get like a title or a mount or something.
Yeah, something cheap on there and whatever that is. Title for sure, that costs nothing, right?
Yeah.
Preferably something cool, like a recolor of a mount, depending on how many bosses you manage to kill. Like 4, 6, 8 or whatever, like bronze, silver, gold.
I mean,
I don't know if I would care about this, but
I mean, so I mean, okay, I'm just thinking about this tier, right?
Mhm.
So obviously the first 3 bosses, there was nothing. Sorry, the first 4 bosses, there was nothing, right? Like there was no difference with us. And again, yeah, my guild killed Ovinax before the nerf. Your guild almost did, but you know, you already played the boss without the nerf, right? So it wouldn't be a thing, right?
Yeah, with slightly better gear than Echo, but yeah.
Yeah, slightly better. Yeah, slightly better gear, but not that much since they actually had like a quite a big split advantage at the start. So like slightly better, but not much difference, right? And then what would happen is that we would get to Kevessa, and we would have like the nerfed version of Enhanced Shaman, the nerfed version of Warrior, the nerfed version of DK, whatever, all these different things, right? Nerfed version of Arcane Mage. And we would get to Kevessa, and we couldn't kill it because we don't have enough DPS, even with 1 tag. And then that would be the end of it. We could not get past that, I think. Just like numbers game, because we can play the fight, you know, we know how to play the fight. We already played the fight pretty much the same. It's just a numbers game at that point.
Maybe they need to make it so there's 3 different tiers, like bronze, silver, gold, and they handpick each season which bosses it's gonna be, and they can not majorly, like actually minorly adjust like the tuning knob on it. Like it is the same as the Raise the Wolf first, but maybe you get an item level or 2 extra depending on the fight, you know, because that's probably more realistic to their situation as well, right?
Yeah, and it's, I mean, so yeah, I don't know, like, so for our guilds that, like, for example, killed like Queen Ansarak, we could kill it before this, you know, there was a round of nerfs like the other week, but we had obviously killed it before, so we could have in some way, you know, been used to that, right? But even then, when this would come out, we would have played it with the post nerf version many times. We would have almost forgotten the previous one, right?
Yeah.
And then I guess so. Like the only difference for us, right? If we compare us and Liquid now on the first on the if we were to get this mode for like Queen Ansarak, right? What would be the thing for us? Well, it would be that we would be forced in the last phase to play 1 more set or 2 more sets of bombs on the end, or whatever they're called, not bombs, essences on the end, right? That's the only difference, right? Everything else on the fight we already played it the same that they did. They didn't change anything really for the fight, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Okay.
maybe it would be fun. I don't know. Yeah, I like the idea, but
I
I
have
don't
a
know
better
how it would work
I
out.
have a
Yeah,
better proposal.
sure. Yeah.
This is a bit of a throwback to our old guild, but what if Blizzard? Because what I'm trying to the overlying concept I'm trying to pitch is the extra time they add, they draw a line in the sand, and they give each piece of content something that most of them hopefully find fun.
Yeah.
Right? And let's ignore M plus and PvP because I don't think that's as much of an issue, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's raid that is the problem.
Yeah, so let's focus on raid. Maybe they could introduce, maybe better in line with farm and having gotten used to the versions of the fights and whatever, maybe they introduce some sort of speed running ladder where you have to they measure the time when you pull the first boss and the last boss dies. And this could be some sort of end of tier competition between raids that could perhaps incentivize farm to another way where halfway through farm you start trying to actually make it quick for a fun reason, for a competitive reason. And you get a reason to minimax the farm. And then it could be the same thing, just some cosmetic rewards at the end of the season, depending on if it's an end of season sort of cutoff or if it's a timer based, I don't know. But make the guilds a race. How fast can you clear?
Yeah, I mean that could be a thing. I mean, I remember it was fun when we were part of this. What was it called? Raid Masters or something?
No clue.
Yeah, there was some competition that was streamed. It was like, you know, Nagura and Cyronic and stuff. It was like pretty high profile casters, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were part of it. We were playing this thing. It was pretty cool. You just
But this could
clearing
probably breathe in some life into the last. Okay, honestly, me just coming up with 2, I mean, maybe 1 or both is stupid to some people, but I think there are ways you can liven it up by adding some sort of competition to it in some way that only gets an effect after a while, just so it something you can look forward to, right?
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't want something that affects the whole raid. You'd want a point that from now on there's a change, or there's another competition you can enter. Obviously, no one will care as much as the actual world ranking and the race in the raid, but they could sure do more than just leave the raid open for people to clear for gear for 7 months, 6 months, whatever.
Yeah.
I think speedrun could be a good idea, some version of it,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
and Blizzard sanctioned.
yeah. I mean, obviously, you know, yeah, obviously, like there's some drawbacks I can see immediately. You know, like, oh yeah, but well, your most shitty classes or whatever, they'll always be on the bench for farm for the rest of the tier. Or yeah, we're not gonna do swap people in and out, so the same 5 people are always gonna sit on the bench, or you know, a bunch of weird things. But we don't have to go into all that. But also, there's the whole issue of if you do something like this, I guess who are we catering to here? Who's gonna do this? It's like the higher end
500?
mythicals that have been farming the raid for like months, right? It's not like any of these lower end cutting edge guilds that just cleared the raid, or you know, ones that maybe haven't even cleared the raid yet. They're not going to participate in this, right?
They're probably 500 or 1,000 or something. Let's say 1,000 by the end of
Like, you think 1,000 guilds would participate in this?
If you're starting when this raid, like if you're starting when the raid would normally end, I think surely. I mean, how many people have killed Anstrak now? And we're not even close.
It would start when the new tier would have come out, 6 months into the tier.
Yeah, this is only the borrowed time, like the time they're moving from season 4 to this season. Like I said, like they need to draw a line in the sand from where we're sort of borrowing time from the future, right? And this is where we implement something fun that will also affect the high-end competitive people in all 3 brackets of PvP and Plus and Raid.
Okay. Well,
and like, we're discussing Raid because that's the most not obvious one, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's like 300 guilds that have killed Ansrag at this point.
Yeah, now we're looking at the next raid is gonna release what, January, February, we said?
February, I think, or maybe even March.
Yeah, so this race, this mini speed race would start in February, or yeah, in February. Or January or something, and run for a month and a half.
I mean, yeah, I don't know, I'm already bored with farming the raid, and we're only in November, but you know, what can you do? I don't know. I don't know. I think maybe,
it's
but
a win-win. You'll clear faster since you'll try, and you get to sit out the raids completely if your class sucks or if you don't want to play. Since hopefully there's 20 people that, I mean, you wouldn't even have to do it, right? It's sort of like season 4. It's optional if you care about the ranking.
Yeah.
But hopefully more fun than season 4.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's definitely a good idea if they could come up with something, but I feel like this, at least to me, I don't think this wouldn't have been a positive for me. I wouldn't have liked it, you know.
Okay. I think me being able to come up with 2, to some degree respectable.
Well, that's
to some degree respectable options.
That's an interesting degree, but
in this discussion, I feel like Blizzard, with experience and competence, could actually come up with some good options to try out.
But so now this was like the options that you came up with for the raid, right? But
yeah,
this also means that the PvP season and the M+ season just drag on, right? And
yeah,
don't we make it worse for those people? Wouldn't they have liked another season with new dungeons and new tuning or whatever instead of this? You know? So I don't know. Like, we also made it worse for them in some sense, right? Because they just get flat one less season now. Where a season for them was actually good before, whereas the raid season sucked, the season 4.
I think for the net positive of the entire game, this also would need to come with expansions coming a bit quicker. That needs to be like cell number 1, right? Like instead of having a 24-month cycle, we'll now have a 21 or something that splits evenly over the year, like a 20-month cycle. So that there's like a mass appeal to start with, because I think everyone wants more expansions, right? Like that should be an easy sell for 90% of the community.
Yeah, or at least more. I think people just want more interesting content, right? At least for me, like I don't care if the expansion cycle is 3 years or 1 year necessarily. It's more about like when do I get new content that is interesting to me, right? Like I could have accepted a 3 year cycle if I got 6 raids, you know, or 7 raids, or you know, like that could have also been fine, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I guess. But this way, you at least you create less average time between the raid releases, which tend to dictate most of the total content in the game. As far as I know, season 4 doesn't give much if you're not raiding or M+ing or anything, right? Like if you're just playing the game casually, season
yeah, I
4
mean
is
like world
probably
content, or
yeah, exactly. So maybe the top sell is more frequent raids and indirectly more content patches. And then you try and convince the M+ers and PvPers that this is good, because you can just split the... I guess M+ers should be easier to sell because they mostly raid to some extent. PvPers, I think they just need to detach from the regular seasons. They could probably have literally twice as many seasons. Just cram in, when the 0.5 patch comes, the first PvP season ends and you start a new one. Sort of like Legion had a bunch of seasons. I think most people in the PvP community enjoy that. Even if it comes at the expense of some transmogs or whatever, like they wouldn't have to be super creative. But I think there's a way to do this.
yeah.
That ends up the game in a better state for most people.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. But I guess now we are not gonna. It looks like we're getting, you know, the 18 or 20-month cycle without having to deal with any of this, right? It's just everything's just faster, right? We basically just lose season 4, right? It looks like we're
Yeah.
not really paying too much of a price, it seems. So hopefully we don't have to.
No,
Hopefully
but you
maybe it just
pad
works
out.
out.
Yeah. Yeah, you still pad out each season, right, to give them some more time. Maybe you
But it looks
could.
like they don't, right? If you remember when we looked at the
Yeah.
last week, it looks
Yeah,
like
yeah.
maybe they don't. Maybe they even make them shorter. So I don't know.
I mean, that's a perfect win-win, right?
Yeah, if that happens, then it's perfect. Yeah, that's why it's going to be super interesting to see when the raid actually releases, so we can get some better takes on, you know, when stuff is actually going to happen.
I came up with one last fast thing they could do for the M+ers.
Yeah.
When you hit this specific mark when they're borrowing time, they could reintroduce some of the great things about season 4 and some additional stuff. They could just completely uncap something like Catalyst. They could give everyone just a Diurna coin in the mail and make it so you can get another one or something. They could unlock some of the things where you can re-gear a character, you can fully gear a character. And in that sense, instead of just locking the patch, they can make it so, okay, you're going to be able to, if you want to, you're going to be able to deterministically get your full bis in the next 2 weeks or something, 3 weeks. So you can use that gear for whatever reason. And each season could end with everyone actually being fully geared. I think this is a net negative for you, though, because you're drawing the benefits from high-end raiding. So you're going to have full gear while some of the M+ers won't. But I think this might appeal to the vast majority of the M+ community that doesn't have full bis.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have to necessarily, you know, go so hard with it, right? You could just say you get one token, pick your fucking item, you know.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be you can get everything you want, you know.
Yeah,
so
there need to be some limit to it, but you get the idea of just...
Yeah.
Okay, so what you get back from this is being able to do your content with deterministically better gear than you would on average.
Right. Yeah, I mean that could be a thing. But yeah, as we discussed, hopefully now we don't actually have to you know, sacrifice anything.
something.
Yeah, we just get everything. But we'll see. We'll see after the new year when we know the release date of the first of 11.1. I guess then we'll have a lot better sense of the pacing that they're going for in this expansion.
Mm-hmm. Did you have anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I did, but we spent so much time talking about random stuff that I think we'll take that another time. So no, I guess I'll just ask, how do you end a podcast?